Hey friends, welcome to our Midweek Moment. Pastor Nicole here, so glad you clicked on. This week we continued on in our sermon series, Unimportant, How Jesus Loved the Outcasts, and we talked about the story in the Bible where at the Last Supper, an argument breaks out among the disciples where they are fighting over who is the greatest. And so we talked a little bit about that and about how Jesus kind of flips the narrative and tells them that he has come to serve and that it's more important that we serve rather than being seen as great. And I think sometimes, we look at that story of the disciples and we're like embarrassed for them. We think like, oh, I would never do that. I would never have that kind of gall. I would never be so rude as to do that. And sometimes I think we can find ourselves kind of thinking we could never see ourselves in the same shoes as the disciples in that moment. And I think that that can be unhelpful because really, I think we all find ourselves in the shoes of the disciples probably more often than we want to admit. And while maybe we couldn't see ourselves arguing in front of Jesus about who is the greatest, I think we all certainly have had a time where we were focusing on the wrong thing at the wrong time. And really, that's what the disciples are doing, right? They are in this holy moment that Jesus is trying to create. He's washed their feet. They've shared Holy Communion together. They're eating the Passover meal together. And this argument, this kind of what we look at as like senseless argument breaks out. And we just think, oh, they ruined it. They ruined the whole meal, the whole holy moment that Jesus had crafted in that moment for them. They just ruined it. And while I think it's easy for us to think that, I wonder how many times we have found ourselves in a place where we were focusing on the wrong thing at the wrong time, and Jesus was like, no, get it together. And really, we're just no better than the disciples, right? Like we find times where we're focused on the wrong thing at the wrong time. And that's what the disciples were doing. They were focused on the wrong thing. They were focused on who was the greatest rather than focusing on this holy moment. And so I wanted to see like if we could think about some times when we have focused on the wrong thing at the wrong time, and maybe later we were able to look back and say, oh, yeah, that wasn't great. I really shouldn't have focused on that. That was the wrong thing for me to be worried about or to be focused on in that moment. There was a bigger issue at hand that I wasn't paying attention to. To the disciples' credit, they kept the story in there, right? Like it would have just been easy to be like, let's skip over that part. We don't need to mention that. It's embarrassing. But they kept that part in. And I think they kept that in because they knew that we would resonate with it. So I want you to just maybe spend some time this week. Is there an area in your life where you're focusing on the wrong thing? And maybe it's not a bad thing that you're focusing on, right? Like it might not be inherently a bad thing, but is it the right thing for you to be focusing on at that time, at this moment? Or is Jesus calling you to focus on something else? Is Jesus trying to say, I know that is a good thing, but here's a better thing. Here's a better thing that I'd like you to focus on. Here's something that's going to give you life and be more important to you than this thing that you think is so important right now. I don't know about you, but there have definitely been times in my life that I was hyper focused on something. And now that I look back on it, I think, wow, I wasted a lot of time and a lot of energy on something that was just not as important as maybe I thought it was, or it was just not what God was calling me to do at that time. And I really, really could have done a lot more good in the name of Jesus if I had focused on what God was calling me to focus on. So I just invite you to spend some time maybe searching your heart this week. Is there something that you need to shift your focus away from? Are you focused on something and Jesus says, I'd really rather you focus on this instead. And I think that, we probably all have those things in our lives that that God is calling us to shift our focus away from. So spend some time this week kind of praying, meditating, seeking out God's wisdom. Where does our focus need to be? And how can we do the best work for the kingdom today? So I invite you to think about that, and we will see you this weekend. You're not going to want to miss it. Palm Sunday. It's going to be a joyful celebration, both in person and online. So I hope we can connect there. We'll see y'all next time. Bye.